A musician's life is full of surprises. There's never 2 days alike, and I never know what I'm going to find in my inbox in the morning. And looking back over the years, I realise how much of the shape my professional life has taken as a result of just chance encounters. One of the significant early ones was when I met Sir David Wilcox, who was a mentor to many of us in the musical world in England and far beyond, actually. He was Director of Music at King's College, Cambridge. And when I was a young student, I was assigned to one of his harmony classes. And at the end of one of the sessions, he said, I hear you've been composing. May I see some of your work? And, oh, yes, of course, Mr. Wilcox. And he said, bring it along at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, which I did, a pile of pieces, among which was the Shepherd's Pipe Carol. And it was thanks to that that I first made that leap from being an aspiring composer to a published composer. And that would never have happened if I'd been assigned to a different harmony class. But it was purely because Sir David was, until shortly before his death, one of the editorial advisors for Oxford University Press Music Department. I would never have had the temerity to show my work. I was only a student, for goodness sake. I wouldn't have had the temerity to show it to a publisher, but I didn't have to because he did it for me. So that was a surprise, a total and utter surprise, and it really started me on the path that I've been on ever since. And I feel I'm returning to my earliest roots when I write for choir, because I sang in my school choir. My mother kept my early school reports, and years later she showed me the one I had when I was barely 5 years old, and it had, reading, good for his age, writing, needs to be tidier, arithmetic, John has some good sense for numbers, which he doesn't, and then singing. So John sings well if he sings softly. So maybe I was a little bit of a vocal show-off at that age, but I do remember that singing in my school choir was a great joy. And I just wished that every school day could just be choir all day. And so a life in and around choral music has been a great joy. You never feel you want to retire or step back. I know that I don't. Am I a composer or am I a songwriter? I think I'm half and half. I was trained in composition. My background is 100% classical in that sense. And yet, I've never been ashamed to write a key signature or write a tune. And that's kind of out of step with what's been happening in the world of concert music and opera for more than 100 years now, really. And it's a funny thing, because if you wanted to be a composer at any time in musical history up to about the late 19th century, if you didn't have an outstanding melodic gift, you wouldn't last 10 minutes. Those guys all could knock out a fabulous tune. Bach, Handel, Beethoven, Schubert, etc. And the funny thing was that as the century progressed, different sorts of music split like a road that divides. And on the one hand, you get what you could loosely call high art music, Wagner, say. And on the other hand, you get popular music. And if you think about it, I can't imagine that Wagner could have written the Blue Danube, and he wouldn't have wanted to. And I can't imagine that Johann Strauss could have written Tristan and Isolde. They were specializing in different areas of writing. And of course, as high art music in the 20th century began to experiment and to develop other areas of music than melody. Texture, harmony, new kinds of orchestration, new sound worlds. Debussy, a great pioneer, Stravinsky and so on. Melody kind of crept out of the window because it was not really relevant to the sort of music that these guys wanted to write. And I'm not sure that in the sense of what you could call a hummable tune, it's ever come back into high art music. On the other hand, melody wanted to take up residence somewhere and moved into the areas of operetta, then of course the musical theatre, and popular song, jazz, blues, folk music. They're dripping with melody all through the whole of the 20th century. But generally the people who specialised in songwriting didn't do what you could call extended composition. Now, George Gershwin was the great exception because, of course, he was able to write hit after hit, but yet he could write Porgy and Bess, which is a fabulous full-blown opera that actually Wagner would have been proud of, you know. But I've always regretted that kind of parting of the ways, and I've tried with the music that I've written to see if there can't be some kind of a reconciliation, whether you can't write music which is informed by the techniques of classical composition, but yet has recognizable tunes in it. I hope that that is possible. If you listen to a lot of my work, there's clearly an influence of the musical theatre, and I'm not ashamed of that. I mean, I would admit Jerome Kern, Richard Rodgers, Gershwin, Irving Berlin, all of those guys as influences. And something I think they understood so well is that melody is a great carrier of words, that a wonderful tune will carry the sense of a text right into the heart of the listener. And that's something that should never be lost in music. And I don't think it has been lost, but I certainly set great store by melody. I wouldn't say melody has to be everywhere in music by any means, but it does have an importance for me. And I think that will always remain so. When you do write a melody, I think it's nice if there's a sense that it's inevitable, that you can't imagine it having been written any other way, and that in some sense it feels as if it's always been there and you've known it all your life. Even though it may be quite fresh and different, there has to be some sense, I think, of rightness. And oh gosh, that can be a struggle. It's not easy to craft a tune that the world will remember, but it's worth the try. The thing that has given me almost most satisfaction just to look at the choral scene internationally is how much the standard has improved since I started out as a kid. There were really not that many good choirs by the standards we would now judge. In those days, I'm talking the 1950s really, where if you had an a cappella piece that began in G major, you had very little confidence that it would end in G major. There was a likelihood it might be somewhere south of F major, in fact, by the time you'd finished. Now, choirs sinking in pitch was something that I got used to, and you know what? It's pretty much disappeared. We just don't expect that anymore. And so to have been involved in an area of music where both at the professional level and at the student and non-professional level, the standard has risen so spectacularly over more than 50 years I'm looking at now, that's been a good area to be in because it's an area of the musical world which has been climbing and is reaching quite a high, not just in America, but in many of the countries that I visit. I don't know whether I'm a good teacher, really. I certainly hope that the young people I work with will take away something from experiencing the classics that I perform with them. I hope, and I think I know, that I have taken them into a realm that they perhaps weren't aware of. I've opened a door to another room. And it's a great feeling when you know that you've been the agent of that transformation in people's lives. I think what I would hope is that no one loses interest in the classics. I very much welcome the diversity that has come into our thinking about repertoire choices. We live in an era of the instant mixtape. And that's great, because sometimes it's like in cookery, putting unexpected ingredients together just gives you something that you wouldn't have had if you'd stuck with the tried and tested. But at the same time, we must remember that our bedrock is the classics. I think the message I would give young people, and they probably know this already, they could give me advice, I should think, is be aware that it's a very tough and demanding discipline. Do not enter the musical profession if you would be happy doing anything else, because it's a profession with many setbacks, many disappointments, many rebuffs. You cannot be assured of success. You cannot even be assured of steady employment, enough money to live. But yet, the professional musicians I know who have achieved any success at all are usually, well, rather driven people, I think. I'm probably a rather driven person. I'm not very good at leisure pursuits, you know. I may develop hobbies as I get older, but so far not much success on that front, because my hobby is turning from one area of music to another. If I've had enough of composition, then I'll have a spell of conducting or whatever. But there is a sense that you're fulfilling your destiny, that I've a sort of feeling, it must be a little bit like religious ministry, that you just feel a call to it, and you don't choose it, it chooses you. And if you're going to be a professional musician, you probably will know. But I think a little bit like marriage, if there's any doubt, the answer's probably no.